BJ Fogg, you are here in Milano to give a lecture for Meet the Media Guru. What are you going to talk about?
I'm going to talk about some of the work I've been doing at Stanford with my Stanford lab around computers, persuasion, how social media can change people's thoughts and their behaviors. I'm going to talk about peace and the potential we have for creating peace with these kinds of new tools, using the innovation process to make the world a better place. Those are the kinds of things.
Okay. You have a laboratory at Stanford University about captology. What does this mean? And how did you come up with that word?
So it's a word, yes, it's a word I made up in about end of 1996.
Yeah.
And it stands for Computers as Persuasive Technology, so it's an acronym. So the word captology does not come from the English word capture or anything like that as a coincidence. It has to do with how computers can change people's attitudes and behaviors, and so it's the study of that area.
Mm-hmm. You are convinced that machines can persuade us to change our behavior. How? Can you give us an example?
Sure. In the 90s, as a graduate student, I did the first scientific experiments to show in real data that computers could change people's beliefs and their behaviors. So I'm convinced because the scientific evidence shows that. Then the web came along later, and I think we've all seen examples of persuasion on the web. For example, Amazon getting us to buy more books, websites about environmentalism to change our behavior, political websites that get us to invite our friends, and perhaps the most dramatic example of all is Facebook. Facebook right now is persuading, about 700,000 people a day to join their service. So that's an amazing example of changing behaviors, and it's all being done because of the Facebook code and the Facebook experience. So they've persuaded people to join it, and those people persuade their friends. So we really have, in some ways, a mass persuasion movement going on that's facilitated by technology, and this kind of thing's never been nothing like this has ever happened before.
You set up a time to reach peace in the world, 30 years. Which are going to be the first steps?
Yeah, and that's a great question because the only thing we know are the first steps. So in my lab, as we talk about achieving peace in 30 years, nobody knows what's going to happen in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. That's too far down the road. But what seems clear is today we have tools that can help bring people together, and it's already happening when you look at what's happening with social networking and YouTube and just the way that Google, for example, has a way to translate web pages from one language to another, and they're doing hundreds. I don't know the precise number, but one of my former students is in charge of it, and they're doing thousands and thousands of web pages a day, taking it from one language to another, which certainly does help people understand each other. So the near-term steps, one of them is just helping people believe that peace is possible. So it's, sometimes people are afraid to talk about peace and say that peace is possible, and we think you must say that, and that people need to recognize the good things happening in the world. Yes, there's lots of bad things. Yes, in some ways, peace has a difficult brand because there's been so much disappointment in the past, and there are many cynics. But what we want to do is help people see that peace is possible, and as we move forward, use these new tools, use ways of innovating that have never before been possible, we can achieve things that have never been possible before. So as a scientist, I think it's important to stay open to opportunities, to new ideas, to things that might even seem impossible. If scientists closed their minds to new ideas, they wouldn't discover many things. And so it is the right scientific approach to keep your mind open to new possibilities and see how they might happen. And that includes looking at how peace can come to the world in a more substantial way.
Going back to captology, don't you think it can be dangerous to persuade people about bad things? You can persuade people to behave badly. How can we defend against it?
That's a great question. So certainly any power has a good side and a bad side. And there's a dark side to captology. People could use computers to persuade people to do things that aren't good for them, such as buy a home when they don't really have the financial resources to buy a home, for example. That's not necessarily a good thing. And there could be even darker things. How do we defend ourselves? I think there are two ways. One is, and this is probably the best way, is to educate people that computers are designed to persuade you. And when people become more aware that this website isn't just about helping me, it's about persuading me to do something, they can then be a little more on guard. Just like when we walk into a sales store, we know those people are trying to persuade us. We react differently. They're not librarians, they're salespeople. Same thing on the web. The web's not a library. It's a place where persuasion happens. That's the number one thing that happens on the web. The second thing, the second way to defend ourselves is government regulation. But that's going to be down the road. The thing we can do right here and right now, and the thing that's really better than government regulation, is to have an education process with people in general and certainly in the schools around how computers can be designed to change what you think and what you do. And also for the good side, if you want to be persuaded to study more, what are the computing tools that will help motivate and persuade you, just like a coach? So it's not just defending yourself against the bad stuff, it's becoming aware of the good stuff and taking advantage of it.
What about your Facebook course? You run a course for parents. Why is that?
Yeah, so I've designed 3 different courses on Facebook at Stanford, and the last one was Facebook for Parents, which was an experimental class. It wasn't an official one, it was an experimental one in conjunction with my lab at Stanford. We got 600 parents signing up for that, but we only could take about 60. And the parents that were in the class were interested because they were concerned about what their kids were doing on Facebook. They knew that there was this new world that their kids were living in, and they wanted to understand it better. So the parents, that age group, a lot of those people my age and older learn differently than kids. Kids are just going to dive in and start using it and learn it, whereas the parents needed a more efficient and a more structured way of learning about Facebook. And that's what the class was about, was to help them understand Facebook. Not just the potential dangers, but also the upsides, the good things that can happen through Facebook. To help them understand that on Facebook, their children can be learning leadership skills, kind of public relation skills, issues around identity, how do you present yourself to the world, and so on. And I think the parents quickly saw that this, whether it's Facebook or something else like Facebook in the future, this kind of thing is never going away. Their kids will always be working in some sort of socially connected media space, and that it's important for the parents to understand that space so they can coach and help their kids succeed in that new world.
Okay, thank you. Be
Sure
grateful.
thing.
We see you at Meet the Media Guru.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.